Leading Ideas Talks podcast is brought to you by the Lewis Center for Church Leadership of Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C. Subscribe free to our weekly e-newsletter, Leading Ideas, at churchleadership.com/leadingideas. Learn strategies to identify and support new leaders and build and maintain effective ministry teams. The More Church Leaders, Stronger Church Leaders video toolkit helps clergy and lay leaders discover a more fruitful way of being in ministry together. Learn more and watch video previews at churchleadership.com/shop. And remember, to stay up to date with the latest church leadership strategies and information, please like and subscribe to this channel and click the bell icon to get updates for new videos. How can leaders respond to conflict in healthier, more productive ways? In this Leading Ideas Talks episode, Brian Brown shares perspectives and practices that can help keep conflict from diverting too much energy from our churches.
Welcome to Leading Ideas Talks, a podcast featuring thought leaders and innovative practitioners. I am Douglas Poe, the director of the Lewis Center, and your host for this talk. Joining me is the Reverend Dr. Brian Brown, who is senior pastor of Woodland Faith UMC and a coach who specializes in conflict management. Our focus for this podcast is conflict management. I'm excited to have Brian with us. Welcome, Brian, to our podcast.
Great to be with you, Dr. Poe.
I want to begin our conversation today, Brian, by sort of just having you share a little bit about how you got involved in helping others with conflict management, which we know is a really important topic, but how did this become an interest of yours? Most people run away from conflict, but you, of course, have an interest in helping others with conflict management.
Yeah, so it started a long time ago, actually, when I felt this call to conflict resolution, i.e. Reconciliation in many ways. And for me, it started with self-reconciliation within myself. I trace my amazement with several things going on within myself back to I guess I was either 9 or 10, 9 and a half, and I played for a boys club baseball team, was real active in all sports. And the initial awakening, I'll never forget it. I was the only African American on this boys club team, and the other team that we were playing on this particular day was all white. And I played second base during that time, second and shortstop. But this game, I was playing second base. And at the end of the game, we were shaking hands as you go through, and the gentleman on the other team that played shortstop, and I had a really decent game. He said, "You play pretty good for a nigger, right?" And I remember at that time, Dr. Poe, it was like a movie and time stood still, as if God was watching to say, okay, let's see how you handle this. And I remember, out of instinct, out of reaction, even hearing and having this space in my being that was watching, pushing this other team player down. And it baffled me for the longest, because I remember a conflict within me. There was this one side of me that was at peace because I could justify what I did. And yet there was this other piece, not so much, that was questioning the result. And so that was this initial, what is that all about? How, there's a conflict going on within me. There's a part at peace and there's a part at war. And so that began the journey from an application of solving conflict. And then I would partner the next big experience when it comes to conflict under not application, but interpretation. And this has a whole different lens in had to do with race again, right? Go figure. So I'm in high school, And I'd had my awakening, my born again experience where my heart was strangely warmed. And I couldn't wait to tell everybody about it. And so happens, a friend of mine, we're on the same football team, Eugene Mangrum, who's Anglo. And he said, "Hey, man, come tell folks at my church about this God you found," right? So he invited me to an all-white Presbyterian congregation, and I know the average age was probably 75. So I'm preaching, and I come out of the African American worship experience. So I didn't know, and that's all I knew. And so I began preaching, and there was dead silence, right? And I remember thinking, okay, they're a little older. They can't hear me that good. So I just started getting louder, right? And then as I'm looking around, there's no dance, there's no movement within the call and response. And I remember preaching from the paper and talking to God from my head. And I remember saying, "God, I thought you called me to this thing. This isn't working. This is something is drastically wrong." And so then I remember Dr. Poe sweating, right, and still going on. And then all of a sudden, there was an awareness that this was worship. And I remember leaving mesmerized, feeling like I had encountered the miraculous. There's a whole nother world out there that has to do with self-awareness. And my capacity to be self-aware of the environment I'm in and what's going on inside of me, external and internal awareness, was a game changer for literally everything. And that began a series of God events putting me in situations where it was more not out of fear, sometimes fear that turned into fascination, right? And so I began to just be extremely excited about energy that's present in conflict. In the book of Revelations, it talks about the church of Laodicea and how they are lukewarm, right? And the story is told about how that church wasn't really good for nothing because it wasn't hot or cold. And I've found that there's heat, there's energy in conflict. And if we're able to transform, reconcile, bring self-awareness, then the chance for systemic change, sustainable change, is far greater in its capacity to bring change about than when there is no energy there. And so that kind of started my fascination around the power behind conflict and the components that, if adjusted appropriately, can lead to experiencing God in new ways, and i.e. one another in new ways.
Let me sort of pick up there when you're talking about sort of the power behind conflict and ask you sort of what are some of the common conflicts you see or hear about in ministry settings? This is, I think, one of the areas where in seminaries, students probably are not as prepared as well to handle sort of conflict that may occur within their particular ministry setting. So what are some of the common sort of conflicts that you hear about that pastors or ministry leaders may face?
Sure. At the end of the day, there is a certain level of self-conflict, and often that one is not lifted up initially when called in to bring about some resolution. But self-conflict, there's gender, race, age, socioeconomic, political conflict. We live in an age where more than ever, individuals, politics inform their theology instead of theology informing their politics. Historical understanding of biblical interpretation, right? And these, all of these, they have a common denominator of this multiplication factor, what I call fear times lack of self-awareness. You increase one of those, then you're going to start moving into areas where we become more and more and more reactionary out of self-preservation.
So just to continue in this vein, in a particular congregation, first time they've had a female pastor, there are some in the congregation who are upset about this. And of course, you talked about fear. Some of this is fear of the unknown that has taken place. How does the conflict sort of get played out? Is it that that pastor is feeling a tension in the congregation? I mean, in some cases, people are actually saying things to her. How does the conflict sort of start bubbling up to the, to the forefront?
Sure, sure. And it's interesting that in some parts of the congregation it'll show up where you've got some individuals that have been around a long time, and they'll be just come right out and say, hey, I don't believe female pastors are ordained to preach or ordained to lead in the capacity of being an elder or the main shepherd of the church. But that becomes less and less over time. Often it is masked in several ways. There is that thought, but there's a conflict within that person knowing that, hey, that's not really right, right? But if they don't resolve that conflict in themselves, it shows up in other ways. And in the ways that it shows up, that particular pastor normally becomes the object of greater scrutiny and microscopic evaluation with individuals often not even knowing what's driving that. And so something that's overlooked or would have been overlooked if the pastor was male, right? All of a sudden, this becomes a game changer in needing to bring about change and needing to bring about this pastor being better in some way. So the microscopic is magnified.
So, just sort of one more question in this vein. What do you think? And of course, I know you can't really answer this, but those who are sort of putting the pastor under a microscope or creating sort of the tension, what do they hope to gain? Is the goal to get rid of the person? Is the goal to sort of shame the individual? Is it all of the above? Sort of, what is the end game for individuals who sort of are sort of the root of conflict?
Yeah, great question. And at the end of the day, it's maintaining the status quo. There's this fear
Yeah.
of going into the unknown, and we've got this internal wiring, right? That we want homeostasis. We want things to remain the same, and the amygdala, where a lot of that's played out in our brain, is saying safe, unsafe, safe, unsafe. And when we get to some things that are tied to un tied to relationships and tied to experiences and unresolved issues within ourselves, then this thing plays out and there's a warning sign, and the reactionary response is to resist the change.
That makes sense. So let's sort of go now to the other side of the fence to start talking about practices or how you can actually deal with conflict. So can you share what are some ways when this conflict bubbles up, no matter what it may look like, gender, political, race, or something else? What are some practices that can sort of help leaders to deal with the conflict?
Yeah. And they, at the end of the day, this is a human condition. Another aha for me, Dr. Poe, was just being led to put myself in situations where I was feeling insecure in knowing that territory, from moving from Virginia to Ohio, to moving out of my context to a whole different context. There was this holy fear, right? God, what are you trying? But it was all about increasing self-awareness. And at the end of the day, the journey is towards self-awareness for all of us. And the more that we can own that, then the more we understand that this is a way that we all have the same insecurities and challenge of allowing transformation, right, to take place. And so as a superintendent, I remember, praying, God, I know you called me to this, but year one, I'm saying I still don't see why. I know I'm here by design, but it hadn't clicked what exactly I was to receive. And I knew it was some kind of blessing God wanted to receive, because years earlier I had ran from that call and felt whole about God saying, no, that's not what I want you to do. And then 3 years later, hearing God, yep, this is what I want you to do. I'm like, wait a minute. Right? So the whole understanding of timing and never say never. But I remember about 3 years in, when I had the privilege at the time, I was blessed to superintend 124 churches, and then exposed to a lot more through the cabinet. The lights came on, and in my spirit, I had already pastored several churches, and I remember in my spirit, without even any thoughts to it, assigning certain feelings, emotions, judgments around certain churches. And then it clicked that what I had experienced was not unique to First Church or Wesley Church or Second Street Church or this church, but there were things that were tied to the human condition that were predictable in the body of Christ. And for me, that was such a game changer, because often as pastors, we're always thinking the grass is greener on the other side, right? And the challenge is, first of all, we take ourselves to that green grass, right? And the other piece is the human condition, how we're wired, what we're challenged and given the opportunity to overcome. And so that was a huge understanding in that these are things that we face in our call to be instruments of transformation.
Are there things that we should be mindful of that can help us move towards collaboration?
Yeah. So several things come to mind. Let me start with an acronym for just basic practice, and then finding the tools to be sharp in these areas. And so the acronym I'll use is PROPEL. Okay, the P to start off is being proactive, because we don't have to ask our brain to engage to keep the status quo. It's designed, it will respond, it will conclude based on previous history, and it does not necessarily ask for new information. It will take 5 facts and conclude. So be proactive and less reactive in our posture. And so, and we do that through prayer, right? To pray and determine, that's kind of the beginning piece. The P for pray. Pray and determine what success looks like. Remember that story I started with the young boy that I pushed after he called me we went through some name calling. So the problem that God had placed in the aha was, you were right and wrong at the same time. You were right in your justification, but there was a deep calling that God calls us to for reconciliation, for transformation. And I was totally a failure in promoting any type of change, right? I perpetuated the same energy.
Right.
And so, what did success look like? Not like that, right?
Right.
So when we're going into a situation, pray determine what does success look like in this situation. The R in that, roadblocks, right? Determine the roadblocks ahead of time that might lead to that, that might seek to prevent uh, success, whatever we've defined as success. And those roadblocks, there's some internal and there's some external. But if I'm going to make a journey, right, I can be efficient in not going down roads, turning around because it's closed or because there's no way across, right? So finding out the roadblocks and being um, um, prayerful in that respect as well. I would say engage the collaborators, right? Who do I? And this is in every relationship that we have. Um, Sometimes I've been dismal failures in trying to plan trips or activities or events with my family, right? When I'm talking to one of the children or young adults now, or and I didn't include other collaborators, right? It's as simple as a conflict on schedules or conflict on what success looks like, right? And so if I keep the end in mind, what is God calling me to, not just me, us to at the end of this? There are probably some collaborators that I can engage in that will uh, further increase the opportunity for sustainable success. Um, and propel the next P, pursue self-awareness. What do I need to be aware of, right? That could take me off my game, right? What are areas in a resource I'll share? And Arbinger does a good job about this, about understanding self-deception, right? So this pursuing that conversation and resources. And then the E and L on propel, the E is experiment, right? Um, after the particular exercise, event, activity, how'd you do, right? And now after that, learn from it. That's the L, and adjust accordingly. So that's something that I put out there as far as just basic framework of getting better. And then of course there are tools that you can use to become sharper in all of those.
So, given the acronym that you just shared, going back to the example we used of conflict for gender, how would then the pastor? I mean, of course, I'm hoping that the goal would be for acceptance by the congregation, um, but of course, we all know that that's not going to happen 100% no matter what. So, how would you, if you were sort of coaching this particular pastor, how would you help them to think about what success might look like? And then using your acronym, what are some things you would ask her to think about in terms of experimenting?
Sure. So for me, when a church is in conflict, I start using some of um, what Arbinger does really well, and that is implementing and developing an outward mindset. And what that is all about is becoming aware of when I am bringing perceptions, I am bringing conclusions to a conversation before we find discovery, right? And so it basically is creating a spirit of humility at the end of the day, saying, God, what do you want to teach me in this? And being comfortable and being vulnerable, right? In how I got to this place, in creating that safe place where we can come together and dialogue and say, hey, this is where I am. Um, and allowing individuals to first be aware of what they need to own, right? Because normally you'll get caught in, not because it's a female pastor, right? It's been shaded and colored, and it's been deflected towards these areas. But these areas have been magnified because of that area. So you gotta take them back to this self-awareness. And often, what happens is those areas become um, less areas of impasse, right? Even if you never really get to the heart of the matter. But it's the self awareness that some deflections going on, what's really at the heart of the matter. And even if you get to a place of impasse, right? The beauty is, if it's done right, you can get to agreeing to disagreeing in love. Never will forget it. Someone I had a huge, and the more you do this, it can get complex. And just because I practice this intentionally, it shows up in different nuances, right? And time is always a factor because uh, there's got to be that time of God, show me what I'm missing, right? So.
So, to shift it just a little bit, how do you deal differently, and maybe you don't? We sort of talked about what happens inside the congregation, but sometimes things happen outside of the congregation that get brought into the congregation, so that there's something going on the outside, family, community, that then gets brought into the congregation in terms of conflict. Or do you deal with that in the same way, or are there other things we should be aware of when it doesn't actually start inside but starts outside of the congregation?
Yeah, yeah. And so, again, that acronym works well in starting a framework on what success looks like, and creating space for conversation and collaboration. Um, Let me see if I can think of an example around something outside. Uh, well, um, if we look at our environment now, um, there is the interpretation of how individuals are responding to the vaccine, right? We have individuals that in their families, there is conflict on whether or not to take the vaccine. And then that finds its way inside the church, right? Um, and we can, depending on the level of that particular area, or let me give you even a better analogy. If two people are in conflict, right? And let's say it's in conflict outside of the church, that spirit of conflict, if it's heavy, right, is brought into the church, and it becomes contagious like a virus.
Yes.
uh, and it spreads, and it Arbinger has a definite, they call it collusion. Not in not And they define collusion not in the way we're used to it in the DMV, right? But collusion in the area where um, I am colluding with someone else in perpetuating the very problem I'm complaining of,
Mm.
i.e., and so I'm perpetuating, I'm adding to it without even realizing it. And we do this all the time. Often what happens is, and that's when we come to our meetings, our ministries in the church. And that's why it's so important to take a deep breath when you start just basic meetings. How is it with your soul, or some type of practice? Because if I just got a call, right, from a loved one that's going through something horrific, or if I just got a call and something made me really upset because someone betrayed a trust or whatever, I'm coming in with that energy, and that's the lens I'm looking through. If that's not if I don't bring that up to the or if that's not known within the team, then I'm evaluating that person as if everything's hunky dory, and then there's this tension that's there that I haven't named, right? Um, and so initially, understanding what we're bringing into a particular context and or meeting. Another resource in that vein is that I use these days is and it's an old it's been around for a couple decades now. It used to be called Strength Finders, and now it's called Gallup Strengths. And the concept is when we come to our gatherings, right? First, let's exhale. What did we bring into the room, right? And now let's be strategic in working out of our strengths. And so when Dr. Poe talks, if I know that one of his main strengths is maximizer, right? Then I know Doug is going to take Dr. Poe's going to take whatever idea there is, and he's going to say, well, why can't we do 15 things, right? And then if he's sitting next to Dr. Sarah, right? And she's more of looking at something from a connected lens, then that's going to take us in the direction of how other things can be added from other organizations. And so we look at one another from strengths, we understand their strengths, and we also understand when they're vulnerable not to work out of that if they came to the gathering with some things on their mind.
Brian, as we get ready to close, are there any sort of last words that you would want to leave with individuals that you think would just help them to even try to prevent some conflict from happening? Are there sort of signs that you can sort of see, or something may start bubbling that you might be able to take action early on to prevent it from really becoming a full-blown sort of mess?
Yeah. And one of the things, and I take this in a different direction than Arbinger does around, they talk about when there's a spirit of peace or a spirit of war within inside of us, right? I take that a step further in that when that spirit of war, when I'm trying to trudge ahead without the spirit of peace within me, without the Holy Spirit moving forward. And so to develop an awareness, self-awareness, just when something's not right within me, right? That's a sign to slow down and find out what's going on. Another resource there, her name is Jill Bolt. She wrote the book Whole Brain Living, right? And she talks about, in a nutshell, that when there's an impulse that's touched within us, right? It has about a 90-second cycle. Right? So this is a basic thing that will save some anxiety for you. When you feel an impulse that's triggered, right? Imagine a bicycle that's been turned upside down and you got the tires on top now. So when you spin that wheel, it'll spin, let's say 90 seconds. If you don't give it any energy, it will subside, and then there will be the homeostasis again. So what we often do is when that impulse comes up, we own it and we start spinning the tire. We start adding energy to it, and then we end up way down the road. How in the heck, man? I was at peace when I came to this movie, and I just got sideswiped, and I'm all full of anxiety now. So that would be a thing. 90-second rule: just stop. Right? Let it, watch it come and watch it go. Right? Have that capacity, and then after that, really understand what it means to spend some time understanding what's going on. Another easy rule is, tell someone I'll get back with you, right? Find out when it's never a good time for you to send an email, right? That self-experimentation. I've gone all through the process of even knowing, okay, this is a terrible time for me to send an email. So I don't send emails late at night because my energy doesn't give you the best, right? But I've experimented, and I said, okay, even knowing that, Dr. Poe, I'll craft an email, right, the best that I can, and then the next day I'll go and look at it, and I am still so humbled that it is nowhere close to the offering that God wants me to give. I mean, how can that be, right? And so this whole understanding of energy, at the end of the day, I'm working on a new resource, hoping to be out next year this time. It's called the Faith Line, the shortest distance between 2 points. And not the straight line, the faith line.
Right.
But it deals with that. It deals with energy, and often that's what the amygdala does. Warning, you're running out of energy. Batten down the hatches. Don't change anything. Fight for this to stay the same. And when we can develop that self-awareness, then we become the gift to the body of Christ that God wants us to be. Because if I change me, I change everything.
Well, Brian, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. Appreciate it, and appreciate your insights. They will be helpful for those who are dealing with conflict, as we all do at some point in time in our ministry.
Thanks for joining us for Leading Ideas Talks. Please like and subscribe to this channel and click the bell icon to get updates for new videos.